For literally thousands of years, one single question has challenged, well, pretty much everyone, believers and skeptics alike, and that's the problem of suffering. So today, we're going to look at a really fresh perspective on this ancient dilemma, and our guide is the mathematician and philosopher, Professor John Lennox. All right, let's get right into it. So this is the question, right? The one at the very heart of it all. And it sounds so simple, so direct, but it is just profoundly difficult to answer. You know the one. If God is supposed to be all good and all powerful, then why does the world look like this? Why is there just so much pain? We see it everywhere, from huge global pandemics to our own personal heartaches. Now, you might think this is kind of a modern doubt, but it's not. Not at all. This is a philosophical challenge that has, echoed down through the centuries. I mean, this goes way back. We're talking ancient Greek thinkers like Epicurus, and it was later sharpened by philosophers like the famous David Hume. And the logic, well, it seems totally airtight, doesn't it? A God who is perfectly good and all-powerful, well, that God should be both able and willing to stop evil. But evil clearly exists, so something in that equation has to be wrong. And this is where, according to Professor Lennox, we've kind of hit a dead end. This way of framing the problem has led to this huge intellectual stalemate. For generations, brilliant thinkers have just been bashing their heads against this logical wall and, honestly, not making a whole lot of progress. So what if the problem isn't the answer we're looking for, but the question we're asking? And this, right here, is where Lennox suggests we make a huge shift in our thinking. And this is where his background as a mathematician is so interesting. Lennox says, when a problem seems completely unsolvable, it's often because we're just framing it wrong. So instead of staying stuck, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, is there a better way to even think about this? Because look, this is the reality that any worldview has to deal with, right? The world isn't all bad. It's complicated. Lennox calls it a mixed picture. I mean, you look up and you see the breathtaking beauty of the stars, but then you look around and see the horror of pandemics. We feel this incredible, profound love, and yet at the same time, we see the absolute ugliness of things like terrorism and barbed wire bombs. Okay, so this is the crucial point. This is where Lennox completely reframes the whole debate. He wants us to move away from asking, why does God allow evil, and instead ask this. Is there any evidence out there for a God who is big enough and good enough that we can actually trust with all of it, the whole mixed picture, both the beautiful parts and the incredibly ugly ones? And you know what? This new question leads us to a pretty startling and really unique place. It takes us right to the very center of the Christian faith, which, believe it or not, puts God himself smack in the middle of this entire problem. Okay, first things first, Lennox is super clear about this. Christianity does not offer some neat, tidy, logical solution that just makes all the suffering make sense and go away. He says it does something totally different. It opens a window on the problem, precisely by putting suffering right at its core. So to really get this, we have to understand the most central claim of Christianity. It's this idea of God incarnate. Now, what does that mean? It's simply the belief that in the person of Jesus, God himself actually became human. And once you accept that idea, it sets up a pretty radical question. And this is the exact question Lennox wants us to wrestle with. If Jesus really is God in human form, then the crucifixion it's way more than just the tragic death of a good man. It's an event that forces us to stop and ask, what in the world is God doing on a cross? What is God himself doing, being nailed to a piece of wood, suffering one of the most brutal forms of execution you can even imagine? And that right there is the first part of the Christian answer. The cross shows a God who hasn't stayed distant from our suffering, just watching from a safe distance. No, it points to a God who actually enters into our suffering and experiences it firsthand. But if the story just ended there, with God suffering and dying, that would be a tragedy, not a reason for hope. So, of course, there's a second, absolutely essential part to this whole narrative. I mean, as Lennox points out, a dead savior is no savior at all, right? The suffering on that cross is profound, for sure, but it is not the final word. The real power of this story and its entire claim to be an answer to suffering, it all hangs on what happens next. So, Okay, here's the two-step logic. You've got step one, the cross. That's where God shows that he's with us in our pain. But then you have step two, the resurrection. And that's where God shows his power over death itself and offers this incredible hope that maybe, just maybe, suffering and death are not the end of the story. All right, so this brings us to the final comparison. How does this whole two-part answer really stack up against the resolution that atheism offers?
Okay, so on one side, you've got the atheist resolution, and it's pretty straightforward. If you conclude there is no God, the intellectual problem of evil is solved. Poof, it's not a contradiction anymore. But while that intellectual puzzle is gone, the suffering is still there. And according to Lennox, all ultimate hope is gone too. Then on the other side, you have the Christian alternative. Now, it doesn't neatly solve the intellectual puzzle, but it dives deep into the experience of suffering and offers something completely different, a credible, almost tangible hope that death is not the end. And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. By just reframing the question, Lennox completely turns the entire debate on its head. He's suggesting that the biggest argument against God, the sheer reality of suffering, might just be, if you look at it from a Christian perspective, the very place where God is revealed most profoundly of all.